Ordinance, second reading, public hearing. Ordinance 22-01. An ordinance amending Chapter 35, Land Use and Developments, Article 5, Zoning Districts Regulation of the Revised General Code of the Township of Millstone, County of Monmouth, and State of New Jersey.
Explanatory statement. This ordinance revision provides for amendments to the official zoning map and the RC Recreational Camp Zoning District to expand the boundaries of the RC zoning district and allow for the continuation of retail uses along Stagecoach Road frontage. Affidavit of publication presented. I'd like to open it up to the public at 8:04. But before we open it up to the public, we have our township professionals here. We have our township planner and our engineer. We asked them to come here to speak specifically about this ordinance.
The owners of the Black Bear Day Camp approached the township and asked for a rezoning of several properties that are currently in the neighborhood commercial zone and the R80 residential zone to bring them into the recreational.
Yeah, it should be on.
The recreational camp zone. So those properties include the old Clarksburg Inn Tavern right across the street from the Township Hall, as well as if we go south of there, the residential property that's on the corner of Red Valley Road. And then if you go even southwest of there, down Red Valley, there's one more property that's currently being used by the camp already. There's a trampoline facility on it. You can't really see it from the road so much. It's pushed towards the campsite. So those properties are proposed to be put into the recreational camp zone so that the camp can expand their facilities, their services and their facilities there. So in addition to adding these properties to the recreational camp zone, the proposed ordinance will be amending a few of the bulk standards. So when I say bulk standards, that has to do with height, lot coverage, those types of standards that control the bulk of a building that can be constructed on the site. The maximum height permitted in the recreational camp zone will go from 30 feet to 35 feet, but it will continue to be capped at a single story. They will not be able to do 2, 3, 4 stories there. The maximum lot coverage, so that's all of your impervious surfaces, any parking lots, walking paths, buildings, tennis courts, all of that counts as impervious surface. That is currently allowed at 10% of the overall property. The proposed ordinance will increase that to 30% of the overall property. And the third bulk standard that will change is the building coverage. So we just talked about lot coverage, which is impervious surfaces. Building coverage is exactly as it sounds, like just buildings on the site. So anything that's considered a structure under township ordinance. That's currently at a 5% coverage of the site. That will be increased to 10%. And part of the reason for these increases is to allow the camp to expand to some more modern facilities that weren't necessarily considered when these standards were written. I'm not even actually very sure when they were written, but just like a lot of other things, their needs for camps are evolving. So for example, the trampoline facility that I just mentioned, that was absolutely not envisioned even 10, 15 years ago. That's really a new use. And when I say trampoline facility, it's one of those where you walk in and the entire floor are big trampolines. By increasing these different coverages as well as the height, it will allow them to bring in some different types of uses for the camp itself. A particular one that we had talked about with the planning board and that I have spoken with the committee that they're interested in doing is bringing in an indoor sports facility, I'll call it. Indoor soccer, indoor field hockey, a variety of sports that could be done on an indoor field, completely enclosed. And that's part of that is the reason along, again, with the trampoline facility, they actually had to come in for they were because when you bounce on a trampoline, you bounce high, they needed a height variance for that because they were exceeding that 30 feet by a couple feet. So the 35 feet is intended to allow for one thing, it'll bring that building into conformance, but it'll also, if they were to construct an indoor recreation facility, that was the height that they deemed appropriate for the structure needed, as well as when you're kicking a soccer ball. Some people can kick that fairly high, so it gives a little extra headroom for that. Another component of what this does, and what was really important to the planning board, the property that used to be the Clarksburg Tavern Inn, the planning board felt like it was really important to maintain that commercial use along the Stagecoach frontage. So the ordinance requires that any recreational camp uses, including any kind of indoor soccer facility, has to be set back 125 feet from that property line on Stagecoach Road. And all of that land within that 125 feet, if it were if it were to be developed, would need to be developed with a small-scale retail use, similar to what would be permitted now. All of the height coverage, the uses, all of that would be exactly what they're permitted to build now. So that would act almost as a buffer. If all of this were to be developed as the ordinance envisions, you would see small-scale, maybe 2 or 3 single-story little retail centers, and then right behind that you would be camp facilities, whether it's the recreational indoor facility they were talking about, or they might decide that something else is more appropriate there. But it creates that buffer, and it continues to allow for the commercial use that's already permitted there. The other properties that are being included will be allowed to function as they already are. The one that has a single-family home on it will be allowed to continue functioning as a single-family home until it's no longer, the person who's living in it or the owners no longer want to live there. And then the other property, as I said, is already being used for a camp use for the trampoline facility.
This is not giving them a permit to do it. They still have to come to the planning board for any project that they propose. That's when the planning board looks at their design, the building, the setbacks, the lot coverage, and all that stuff. It still gets reviewed. And just FYI, where the Kloschberg Inn is right now, it's zoned neighborhood commercial, and it permits 35 feet high building. So that height that we have here is actually matches what's permitted right now. And the neighborhood commercial, you could actually have 70% lot coverage. So we actually decreased that lot coverage. It actually has 30% building coverage, that's what we have here. So compared to what's there now, we're actually a little better.
The intensity of development that will be permitted will be less than what is permitted now. And Matt makes a good point. Any of the operational questions or issues associated with site maintenance, the actual designs of the building, any operations associated with that, they'll have to come in and get approval from the Township Planning Board. They can't, this doesn't give them a clean, this doesn't pass out anything. They have to come in and get all approvals. Matt and I will review it along with the Planning Board or Zoning Board, depending. So this would just create the standards that allow them to develop.
So McKinley, does this conform with our master plan? When it went to the planning board, did they review it? Did they look at the master plan and look at the ordinance and compare what is allowed and what is not allowed?
That when a town is considering a rezoning, the ordinance has to go to the planning board to determine if it's consistent with your master plan's goals and objectives, which are designed to create a vision for the future for the township. So this was in front of the planning board on the 9th. A few things were discussed at that point, one of them being the fact that this rezoning is not explicitly discussed in your master plan, which was updated last in 2017. At the time, that was right before the Black Bear owners came in and asked for this discussion, so there wasn't any discussion within the master plan specifically about rezoning these properties.